I don't often do collaborative podcast discussions because I like to hear my own voice. I kid, but if you were to look at the length of some of my solo podcasts, you'd be excused for thinking that. Anyway, in this episode, I had the pleasure of having Ramon from the Wellness Messiah podcast and channel on the podcast. Ramon does a lot of research in longevity as well as biohacking. He focuses on metabolic mechanisms and biochemical aspects of aging. He's been blending the scientific literature with personal experimentation and coaches people on a one on one and in group settings. He currently leads a longevity hackers group where members collaborate to experiment, test, and share their findings in the pursuit of extended youth and vitality. Ramon and I had a discussion at length on the NAD state of evidence with respect to longevity, including the infamous or famous Dr. Sinclair's work, including a recent study that Dr. Sinclair is publishing. It actually hasn't published yet, but we had access to the data, so we discussed it. This was a really fun conversation. We really drilled down on the one topic to get into the weeds, as well as offer some summarizing points near the end. I hope you enjoy. Let us discuss the wide world, the crazy world of NAD and NMN and NR and aging and Dr. Sinclair, and there's so much more to discuss. So thanks for being on here.
Thank you for having me. Being a big fan of your work.
I appreciate it. I've been checking out your videos too of late, quite a lot actually. Well, actually not even of late. It's I think I started seeing your videos pop up on the browse and like recommended and whatnot, maybe almost a year ago now. It's got to be something like that. So it's been a while already.
Yeah, the reason why I was so happy to collaborate with you because people from my coaching group, they really like your content a lot, so they really trust
Mm.
you. So I felt okay, so we need to do something together because I think we are both trustworthy. We both do not endorse any supplement companies and even food products whatsoever. And we are both extremely curious about the research and the interpretation of that, correct?
Oh yeah, for sure, absolutely. Yeah, well, I'm always honored and flattered when people have such confidence in me. I take it, I imagine you do too, with a level of gravity that comes along with that. Like you don't want to let people down.
Yeah, yes. And you also want to give them something unique about what, so yeah. And I think you do that perfectly.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Well, talking of unique things, I know you've done a lot of work related to looking at the research on NAD and anti-aging and Dr. Sinclair, as I mentioned, and I'd really like to get your perspective on this whole thing. So I know I sent you some questions that we'd be going over, but we'll end up, diverting any which way. What I'd really like to do is get to serious depth on one topic. You know how a lot of podcasts they talk about a whole host of different topics and it just kind of goes all over the place, and those are super interesting. But what I'd really like to get your perspective on is just to focus in on this one topic and go down the different rivulets and different avenues by which we can understand NAD and NMN and all that. So let me ask the first question. Uh, what is NAD? Like, why is it important? Why are people so interested in it?
Okay, NAD is a molecule that serves many purposes in our bodies, including production of energy. But I think the most interesting aspect of it has to do with aging and longevity. But for that, we have to kind of step back to understand the purpose of what is longevity, why so many people are interested in that subject, and only then we can really weave it into NAD itself. But in short, NAD feeds two enzymes that are associated with longevity. One is the sirtuins. They tend to collapse the DNA and expand it. You spoke a lot about it. And they control regulations of genes. The other type of enzymes is called the PARPs. These are DNA repairing enzymes. So both epigenetic information, how the genes are being activated and when, and also the actual damage to the DNA are both being controlled by enzymes that are that consume NAD. They consume it as food. But we have to go back to longevity itself Self, then we're gonna weave back to Sinclair and the NAD, and then we can speak about NMN, because once we understand that, we could have a direct link to recent Sinclair study and understand that to interpret better the data. But once we're gonna have the context of what is aging, what is longevity, and how NAD plays into that, then I think we can give better insights to the person who's gonna listen and watch this about whether they should take NMN. What does NAD booster do in their bodies? So maybe we can go that route. What do you say?
Absolutely. Let's take it wherever we want.
Okay, so in my situation, let me give you a quick background. I've been researching this field of, I think, wellness and longevity since 2007. And actually, my first clients used to, they wanted to lose weight. And there are three ways to lose weight. One, you can target caloric restriction. The second aspect, you can target insulin, which is what many weight loss diets do. You just cut down carbs. And the third way to do that, and you can actually target aging directly and longevity. And this is what I've been doing. And when you think about it, it makes sense, because when we are young, it's easier for us to lose weight, lose belly fat, whatever. But as we grow older, it's more difficult. And suddenly, even caloric restriction doesn't really work as well as in the past. Now, speaking about aging, so there are three mechanisms that control both weight loss and aging: insulin, leptin, and PPAR alpha. Uh, it's a very interesting mechanism that apparently when we get into longevity preservation state, the body begins to burn fat. So PPAR alpha also affect that mechanism. Now, why would I even raise the thing with weight loss? Which is because it shows us that targeting aging and longevity can achieve many goals in wellness in general. So we have seen, for example, with the, I would say in the COVID-19, for example, we have seen that there is a process that the very same person at age 20 or versus age 70, their bodies deal differently with COVID-19. For whatever reason, we can see there is a process that happens with time that is not necessarily something that we want. We want to preserve that. And the idea is, and I try to communicate, is that from a wellness perspective, longevity and aging is basically one thing that targets many other things: energy, concentration, weight loss, and hopefully risks of diseases. And because of that, and Sinclair basically in the last 6 years came out and spoke a lot about it and generated a lot of enthusiasm that is really justified by the field itself. This one thing that achieves many other things. Um,
Okay. Can I stop you there for just a
Absolutely, yeah.
second?
Stop
Okay.
me anytime you want.
Okay. Sounds good. Um, so two things. One, before we get, I'm just going to name the two things, and then we can go back to number two. But the second thing I want to discuss is, who is Dr. Sinclair? Because some people that are listening probably have no idea who Dr. Sinclair is. Although some people are going to be incredibly in the know and know exactly how he relates to this whole NAD story. The first thing I wanted to touch on real quick, though, was you mentioned weight loss, and I think it's an interesting way to go from like the weight loss journey, which a lot of people are always trying to get through, to NAD. But you mentioned that caloric restriction is one way, and targeting insulin is another way, and then the third way is by targeting aging. I'm wondering, aren't those basically, aren't they, like, if like the fingers were tied together, wouldn't they be just right on top of one another, essentially the same thing? Like, if you were to target caloric restriction, you'd be targeting insulin as well. Or if you were to be targeting insulin, then you'd be targeting caloric restriction in many instances. Isn't there a lot of parallel between those two?
There is an overlap, but let me give you the most classic example. Okay, if you do a high protein, low carb diet, you target insulin, but you increase IGF-1. IGF-1 actually preserves muscle mass, and also you actually increase human growth hormone, which targets the fat loss itself. So what you have a situation where you basically burn a lot of protein, and protein is inefficient energy source which helps you with fat loss. But in essence, you get low insulin, high IGF-1. When you target longevity, you want to reduce IGF-1 pretty dramatically. You want to reduce mTOR, all those mechanisms that control aging from the protein perspective. And this actually, you're going to lose some muscle mass. So as opposed to high protein, low carb, you're gonna lose pure fat, but and you're not gonna lose muscle mass. You actually may even gain muscle mass. When you reduce both protein and carbs, you're going to lose weight, both lean muscle mass, because you're gonna drastically reduce IGF-1, and you're gonna reduce insulin. And with caloric restriction, actually, you want to cut the fat the most when you think about it. Like fat is, you have 9 calories per gram, as opposed to protein and carbs. So you actually don't necessarily play so much on the your main target is to reduce the fat when you think about it. So it's kind of similar. There is a lot of overlap, but I think there is the main difference has to do with IGF-1, and also you can actually eat excess calories and target aging by targeting insulin and IGF-1. So there is an overlap, but I can show you this distinct separation between the three of them.
I think that makes sense. I mean, certainly IGF-1 is a major player when it comes to aging and muscle mass.
And it's pretty good for pure fat loss, because it preserves muscle mass. It gives the instruction to the muscles, do not disintegrate. And when it goes down, then the instruction is lost.
I think it should probably be noted, though, that we're talking about like a single mechanism. Like we're talking about insulin or we're talking about IGF-1, but there are a lot of things. Like if you were to increase your protein consumption to a pretty large amount, let's say the standard amount for preserving muscle mass or gaining muscle mass, for example, you have many different mechanisms that get changed, right? For example, like you would see increases in protein synthesis, for example, which might be independent from IGF-1. Or you might see decreases in protein degradation, which also may be independent of IGF-1. So just for anybody listening, I think my perspective would just be to not necessarily just focus on any one hormone, or not focus on, not any one hormone, but just understand that there are many mechanisms that may be at play to lead to a similar effect. I mean, what do you think about that?
Yeah, that's correct. I gave simplification of weight loss. That would be there are many ways to lose weight, even correcting hormonal imbalances, doing detox, many ways. There are many ways to lose weight. I just gave oversimplification, let's say. Gotcha. But the main idea is that losing weight doesn't translate into longevity. It's not the same thing.
You don't think it does? If you, let's say if you go from, and all I'm doing right here is just trying to figure out the context around things. Because like you said, you're oversimplifying so that we can get to the next section. But I'm just trying to make sure that when a person hears this, that they don't, just take something and just run with it and just apply it without any sort of context. So like if let's say if we're talking about a person who's obese and they end up losing weight, don't you think that would have a significant effect on their longevity as on an individual basis?
I would say yes. Let's think about it this way. We lose. So human beings, on average, we tend to gain weight in our midlife, and then over 65, we begin to lose weight, but not in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Also in mice, by the way, they have the same idea. They gain fat, which is not good, and then they begin to lose bone mass, muscle mass after equivalent of age 65.
Yeah.
Also, many diseases we lose body weight as well. Diabetes, in the beginning you gain fat, and then suddenly you lose body weight. And accelerated diabetes, cancer, we lose weight. When you take cyanide, which we know we're gonna kill you, lose weight as well. So I think weight loss has to be in a way that, ideally preserve body's fitness, keep your body strong physically, while losing the excess fat, and especially visceral fat is like the most dangerous kind of fat, because we know it speaks with the entire body and bombards the body with inflammation and inflammatory signals, So I even view, let me give you a simplification of fat in my opinion.
Okay.
Brown fat is going to extend your longevity. Visceral fat is going to kill you. Overall fat, it depends. Uh, I mean, under the skin fat, right? Under the skin fat, um, there is good evidence that you want to have about lower body fat, but this is a bit of we're not really sure. Maybe you can go to too low body fat, but generally speaking, yeah, if somebody is obese, I mean, they have a lot of problems. Uh, there is no doubt that losing weight in that situation would 99% of the time is going to make them live longer.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's true. I mean, your point's really well taken, especially with disease states. I mean, if you're talking about like cachexia or diabetes, late stage diabetes for sure. Alzheimer's is another one actually, and
Yeah.
there's another effect on blood pressure as well with Alzheimer's, where there's a sudden drop in blood pressure a few years before a person develops Alzheimer's. That data is still kind of they're still trying to figure that stuff out. But the point being that there are these like sudden counterintuitive physiological changes that then kind of precede really dangerous moments like mortality or the sudden progression of a disease or whatever it might be. So it's really well taken. Okay, so the second question I was interested in is like, could you describe like who Dr. Sinclair is and his relationship to this like whole NAD story in case somebody hasn't heard of him?
Yes. Of course, we all know he is a professor of biology and genetics from Harvard.
Mm-hmm.
But let's connect his story to the research in aging.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So up to Sinclair, yeah, after Sinclair, up to the time Sinclair came along, the main belief in the aging community is that we are born with a young body, similar to receiving a young car, and then there is accumulation of damage over time. So ideally, aging is caused by accumulation of damage. So what we want to do is we want to increase repair and reduce damage. And of course, they came out with the 9 to 10 hallmarks of aging. You're familiar with these, right? Increasing the senescent cells, DNA damage, mitochondrial damage, toxins inside the cells, toxins outside the cells. And then Sinclair came along. Sinclair originally researched yeast. And in yeast, if you activate the SIR2, it's called SIR2, but in our bodies, it's SIR2 and 1. It showed that they increase longevity, but only in yeast. That was one of the controversies because we have seen it does not increase longevity in mammals, and even any animal, because yeast are single cells. But Sinclair came along and he proposed that we got it all wrong, because Sinclair looked at the DNA of all people and he looked at their genes and he said, hold on, the genes, the digital storage of information on how to maintain good health, it doesn't change with time. So what's going on? We would expect our genes to get destroyed, but they intact, almost. So he said it's how your body uses this information, which we call epigenetic information. And this is a very important term to understand NMN, the epigenetic information. So for the listener, try to remember that term. And this information means how the genes are being activated and when. And this changes dramatically as we age. So Sinclair says it's not the genes, it's how they are being utilized and when they're active and the identity of the cell that follows that. I can expand on that if you wish. But
yeah, please.
Okay, so he found that the cell loses identity with time. So as the cell loses the knowledge of how to operate the genes correctly, what to turn on, what to turn off at which specific time to create the symphony of health, the cells forget that with time. It's information that is being lost with time, with age. Then the cell loses its identity. Suddenly, genes that are supposed to be turned on, they're turned off, and vice versa. And he found that suddenly cells become similar. Suddenly, neuron cells behaves like a liver cell when it should not really behave like this. And it's one of the reasons he says why we lose eyesight. So basically, you lose identity. And if to be honest, if you look at older people, like somebody at age 80, we can see we actually lose some of our sexual identity, meaning that when near the end of our lives, we kind of look. I mean, men and women, they look a bit more similar. I mean, a lot of the sexual identity we have, we kind of lose it with time.
That sort of makes sense, right, from a hormonal standpoint, too, right? We see
Yeah.
significant decreases in testosterone basically to a null point. I'm not saying it goes to zero specifically, but it decreases towards that point. And estrogen obviously gets tanked in women. So there's certainly some hormonal changes that get closer to what I guess what you're saying with this change in identity compared to 30 years prior or 40 years prior.
Yeah, and also in yeast, they lose their fertility. It's very similar to us. We also lose fertility as we get older, I think.
Yeah.
So in yeast, they measure aging a lot of times by loss of fertility.
Correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a while since I've read that Sinclair paper. I guess it was almost 2 years ago since it released the information theory of aging or whatever he called it or dubbed it. But
Yeah.
there was this experiment because it was in mice, and he did this experiment where they caused a ton of DNA mutations to the mice, and then the mice recovered like the actual DNA structure. Like you said, the genes don't change, so the genes were able to be recuperated and fixed and whatnot to almost identical to what they were, but the epigenome was suddenly massively different between the mice that did not undergo these DNA mutations versus the mice that did have these DNA mutations, which I thought that was such a cool finding because it gives credence to this idea that epigenetics is like this whole nother layer of genetics that we just don't, I think it's getting more popular certainly, but we just, in a classical way of how we thought about genetics, we just never really considered that it could have this other layer that have such a massive impact on our aging and on our health.
Yeah, absolutely correct. Yeah, and what supports Sinclair's theory, to his credit, was the development of the Horvath clock. And indeed, we see that it does correlate with chronological age.
Could you explain that a little bit, the Horvath clock?
Yeah, it's algorithm in which they found methyl groups in specific locations in our DNA. So when they did the algorithm for every animal, they used different mathematical formula. Every animal, as it ages, there are specific spots in their DNA and also our DNA that accumulates those methyl groups.
And the methyl groups are the epigenetic tags that are applied to DNA.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. As opposed to the histones, kind of they're different. You know that. So so um, so in essence, they found a connection that supports Sinclair's idea, which makes, I think, the Horvath clock made the enthusiasm around NMN even bigger, and we're going to we're going to discuss that. So it's very important to know that there are things that supposedly support Sinclair's enthusiasm around this NAD and epigenetic information. It's not just one main show. There are other things that support that. Um, so, but yeah. Do you want to connect that to the to Sinclair's work, or
Yeah, so I mean, you've talked about how Sinclair had this idea. Well, we've talked about the information theory of aging, which relates to epigenetics and whatnot. So there was some precedent for the idea of, oh, maybe we could manipulate epigenetics in some way. So yeah, if you could go into like how NAD, because you had mentioned that NAD is involved in different enzymatic reactions, just in very simplistic terms. The sirtuins and the PARP enzymes. It's also involved in a number of other reactions as well. But when it comes in relation to epigenetics, we're talking about those two enzymatic cascades. So yeah, if you could talk a little bit about how we got into this like whole NAD. Why did we start focusing on NAD? Why was Sinclair so focused on it?
yes? Okay, so in essence, Sinclair said this whole idea, all the theories of the old guys is wrong, because if we simply focus on the epigenetic information, is going to maintain the rest of the mechanisms that preserve our body is healthy and young, much better. So it's basically the one thing that is going to answer all these hallmarks of aging, and all this idea of so in other words, when you keep, if we're going to use the theory of the analogy of cars, instead of trying to fix the car all the time, you simply preserve the information of the car all to keep itself healthy. So suddenly you don't need the old theory. That's gonna solve all the issues. It's gonna be the one thing that is going to basically solve aging. You see, that's what he claims.
That's a pretty big, bold claim.
Yes, that's a bit. So in Sinclair, he researched 7 enzymes that protect this information. So then you go to so if you buy into Sinclair's idea, you're gonna ask the question. So how does the body naturally preserve this information? So the body uses 7 enzymes. They call these sirtuins. And we know that these enzymes, they consume NAD for energy. It's like food for them. And NAD, nicotinamide mononucleotide, is a molecule that, as we said, it does many things, including it increases my energy. When I consume NAD boosters, usually I feel more energetic. But besides that, it feeds those robots, these enzymes that preserve the epigenetic information. So the idea of Sinclair is that if we could feed the robots with more food, with more energy, they could preserve more of this information. In essence, you're going to get slowed down in aging. And then, of course, I'm going to add as well that there is a huge insight, I think, that is useful to say here. When the body has a preference to repair DNA over preserving epigenetic information, this is very important. This is, I think, one of the most fascinating thing about how the DNA works. And it actually supports Sinclair's idea of boosting the body with NAD. Let me explain. So when there is DNA damage, not epigenetic damage, but DNA damage, our bodies, our DNA gives the preference to the enzymes that repair the DNA over preservation of epigenetic information. The PARPs, the enzymes that repair the DNA, they're gonna receive a preference over the sirtuins that Sinclair researched. And this means that there is some competition here, and this means that if there is some DNA damage, your DNA actually cares more about the future generations of humanity than your health. Make sense?
Yeah, it does. That's really interesting.
Yeah, that's fascinating because it kind of tells you the priorities of DNA. Saying, I don't care about epigenetic information now. I care more about the DNA you're going to give to your children. Then we're going to reset the epigenetic information. We're going to take care of that later. Right now, you're not on the first priority. So what does it mean? It means that in situations where there is high consumption of NAD, for example, when you have radiation damage, when you get X-rays, when you go on flights, you want to have extra NAD just for the sirtuins also to have a part of the cake as well. So this actually, when your DNA is exposed to attacks, it's a more opportune time to consume NAD boosters because you don't suffer from this preferences to future generations. And we know definitely that when there is DNA damage, then there is a decline in NAD due to PARP activation. And this has been correlated with downregulation of sirtuin activity. So you're going to get faster aging. And Sinclair actually showed that in a lab. They caused DNA damage, and they saw that epigenetic aging accelerated. You know this, one of the studies?
No.
Yeah. So he showed it. The theory is correct. When you starve the sirtuins, you're going to get faster aging.
Okay. Yeah. That's fascinating.
Yeah. But it all goes down to the idea that the DNA prefers DNA repair over preservation of epigenetic information. But the problem that we think that happens is that once it's lost, there's really no good way to preserve that. But the DNA, what Sinclair and others found, that there is a reset, but that only happens when we give birth. So that's how a 40-year-old woman can give birth to a zero-age child, baby, because you're going to reset of this epigenetic information. But I think the DNA knows that the genes has to be intact.
I'm assuming you're talking presumably in the child that you have this reset in DNA and epigenetics and whatnot.
in a baby.
Right.
I mean, when a baby is born,
Yeah.
is going to have a perfect epigenetic information.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've never thought about it, but that is a pretty remarkable process to think that it's coming. I mean, no matter what, a mature person has to have suffered some level of DNA damage and epigenetic changes, right? There's like it's throughout our entire life cycle. We just constantly go through these changes. So it is remarkable that we have a baby is at ground zero, just like absolute zero, and then starts going through these changes as well and begins the journey. It's a fascinating concept to think about.
Yeah. And when you think about it, it explains some of the enthusiasm about NAD, because suddenly taking a supplement that increases above the baseline, it kind of gives you an edge on that process.
Yeah. Yes.
Theoretically,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because
So let's talk
yeah,
about that. Exactly. That was a
theoretically.
great kind of like history into, how we got to this point. Like, and it makes complete sense. Like, I want to be a baby again now. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
just kidding. I would love to just like return back to like maybe 18.
babyhood.
I'd be okay. But yeah, okay. So now we have the
But at least you don't
rationale.
want to. At least you don't want to lose this information. Your body
Absolutely.
has perfect. You're young. I'm young. I'm 37. I
Mhm.
consider myself young. My body has the information how to keep itself healthy. I
Right.
don't want my body to lose that information. So I know I'm going to have some assaults on my DNA over time, and I want to make sure that the sirtuin is going to have enough NAD around, so the parps are not going to consume all the NAD.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. So that's the
Theoretically.
that's the theoretical understanding. So what was the approach that people have tried or scientists have tried to try to boost our NAD levels and therefore activate our sirtuins and all that stuff? Like how did that research turn out?
Yeah. Okay. So this is perfect question here. So NMN is not the only supplement that increases NAD. We have NR, which is very similar in its structure to NMN. Also, the direction in which it increases NAD metabolically is the same. We also have niacinamide, which I know Andrew Huberman, he spoke about the benefits of niacinamide for skin health, but here we focused on aging. And in aging perspective, excess niacinamide actually inhibits sirtuins. It's like a negative feedback loop. And we also have niacin. And niacin, what is interesting about it, first of all, it has the most amount of research, and it's actually more powerful per milligrams as NAD booster compared to NR and NMN. And also, it's much, much cheaper.
Do you have any speculation as to why that might be?
Yes, I think because the size of the molecule is much smaller, so potentially you're gonna get way more NAD molecules per the same weight when you think
Gotcha.
about it.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
Like weight, I mean, it's like I think 3.5 smaller. Uh, and Michael from Conquer Aging channel, he has done amazing research on his body, and he showed that 60 or 50 milligrams of niacin equivalent to NAD boosting in his blood to 1 gram of NMN. 50 to like 50 to 20 times
Yeah.
the equivalency.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how. So it's really powerful NAD booster, and nobody really speaks about it besides Michael and I think myself. If
Yeah.
you really want to go with NAD, it's kind of NMN for the poor. If I want to put myself,
Okay, so there's several different avenues by which we can potentially increase NAD. Do we see that increased in the research? Do we see that NAD levels are increased? And then as an extension of that down the road, do we see improvements in sirtuin activity? Do we see anti-aging effects? Like what does the research show?
okay, that's a very good question. First of all, every one of these NAD boosters, they tend to work better in different tissues in our bodies. For example, niacin is very good at increasing NAD in the gut, in the liver, in certain tissues more than others. But all of them increase at some point blood NAD. So it would seem that there is an NAD status that is average in the body, but it would seem that every and every one of these supplements tend to activate NAD in a different pathway, different ways. Because when you think about it, every cell in your body has a genetic expression to produce enzymes that are going to utilize these differently. So, for example, to convert niacin to NAD, you need certain enzymes. So not every tissue in your body has the genetic expression sufficient to make this conversion.
Yeah,
Make
that's a
sense?
great point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think so. This actually creates, from a practical perspective, it creates a good case to actually take a combination of these. Also very interesting. Even though in our NMN they seem to target NAD from the same direction, Rabinovich study from 2018 they injected NR-NMN, and they found higher NAD levels in higher NR levels in the muscle tissue, but it was injectable. So it would seem theoretically that NR in that situation, even though it comes from the same direction, surprisingly, it operates differently than NMN. And also speak about NMN. NMN in all the studies, including Sinclair study we're going to speak today, is non-existent in the blood after consumption. And they also show that in supported by the 2018 Rabinovich study. So you understand there is a complexity of different tissues, and what the heck, I mean, where the NMN goes, nobody really knows once you consume or inject it. It just disappears. And all you see is niacinamide.
So you think it's being just converted to something else then?
I don't know what happens, to be honest. I mean, they themselves really not sure, but there are some speculation. I mean, some of that is definitely going to be consumed by your gut bacteria, the gut, and the liver. Sinclair 2024 study also showed an impact on the gut bacteria, which suggests that the bacteria in your gut, they consume some of that NMN that we take as a supplement. They're absolutely certain. So this says that if you can take low dose of NMN, probably the gut, the bacteria, and the liver are going to consume all of that. And the rest of the body is simply going to see the niacinamide, which is the byproduct of NMN consumption.
Are there any human studies that show functional benefits of like NMN supplementation that you know
of? First of all, the human studies they have a lot of conflict of interest with them, and they're underpowered. Very few people, and the length of time that they measure people pretty short. And if we speak about longevity and aging, you're not going to see anything.
Sure.
But yeah, so I think if you're gonna speak about human studies, there is no reason to take NMN whatsoever.
But wouldn't it make sense to at least probe to see if NMN actually enters into the tissues? Let's say like muscle tissue, for example. I definitely understand how it'd be very difficult, if not impossible, to measure aging specifically because it's just such a long-term thing that we do need to rely on models instead of looking at human data for that. But I know there are NMN studies that have been done in humans and for functional outcomes, like if that's like blood markers or if that's looking at like muscle like activity or if that's looking at sleep and stuff like that. Do you know, because I can't remember off the top of my head, do you know if any of those studies, if you've actually seen any of the NMN actually enter into the tissues themselves? Because you're saying that it's disappearing really quickly, and I'm assuming that's in mouse models, but I'm curious if there's
Also
any
humans.
sort of carryover.
Humans.
Okay, that's also in humans then.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. Let me tell you. So first off, what we really see is niacinamide in the tissue, and what we really see, and Rabinovich showed that. We also have very interesting study on niacin that showed that I think like 500 milligrams of niacin increased NAD in the muscle tissue. They actually showed that about 6 times after like 2-3 months. Pretty significant. So with niacin, we actually have a study that shows it increases NAD in the muscles.
This was in humans?
Yes.
Okay. Wow. Okay. That's great.
Humans with the NAD deficiency. They specifically targeted those people.
Okay. But They were just looking at biochemical markers, so they were just looking at increases in NAD, but I'm assuming they weren't looking at any sort of functional differences. Let's just like taking a sidestep from anti-aging. Like, are there any sort of like functional measurements that we can tell if NAD boosting NAD has any sort of benefits? Because, like we said at the beginning, NAD is involved in 100+ biochemical processes, so it's important across many different aspects of cells. For example, like energy, NAD is critical for mitochondrial function. So it would make sense to have some sort of carryover to functional benefits that we might see in like musculature, for example, or wherever it might be. Do you know if they looked at anything like that?
In some of the human studies, I did see some um, endurance benefits, but the data was so weak, so I don't even like take it into account in my thinking, to be
Gotcha.
honest.
Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense.
And there is a conflict. One study they shows, and one study used like 300 milligrams, another one 1 gram. You don't know if the dose, how they did the study.
Yeah.
So few people. I don't want to say anything that doesn't have good data behind it. But we do have for a very very important distinction about what you said is that we do have a measurement for blood NAD, but it doesn't really tell us the whole story because we care about cellular NAD. We don't really care about blood NAD
Mhm.
because if you look, let's go back what the body does when it tries to preserve epigenetic information. It begins to recycle NAD using an enzyme called NAMPT inside the cell. This is what it does. So it's the recycling of NAD inside the cell that what this is what the DNA in our bodies do when they get into longevity preservation mode. Blood NAD doesn't really tell us anything about it.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so yeah, continue on with this with how NAD is related to the specifically to aging and what research is out there.
yeah, so we have this theory, right? So take this NAD booster, preserve epigenetic information, target aging and longevity, get the whole shebang, protection from diseases, younger body, less frailty, younger looking skin. This is it. We figured it out. So we need to see like what. So we have this issue. It's difficult to track the metabolism of NAD. The regulation of NAD is really high, and we don't know where those supplements disappear. We don't fully understand the metabolism of it. So at least what we can do is to see an impact on the epigenetic clocks and also on lifespan studies, right? So that's going to be like the end result. If you're gonna get the end result, maybe we can prove the theory was right. So the first one of the best mortality studies we have on NAD boosters was conducted on by the ITP. They give NR, not NMN, NR about 280 milligrams equivalent in humans, and it did not provide any lifespan extension in mice. And they conduct those studies in 3 different locations, and no extension neither in female or male mice. So that was, I think, like the first issue that we had, because we would expect even smaller amount would be translated to longer lifespan, and it didn't happen. And as I said, some of the human study, and we don't have human data on longevity lifespan, not even genes that activate longevity. We don't have anything of that. We do have some of them showing some muscular benefits and exercise performance, especially in older individuals over age 60 or so. But I think the 2024 mid 2024 study came by Sinclair, and I think that this really gave us more confidence about how these supplements work, specifically NMN and NR. I can also say, because there is such a small amount of data about in humans, I think there is value in taking into account also stories from anecdotal stories from people who take NMN and say, suddenly I feel more energetic, I can perform better in the gym. So I also take that into account, because in my private group, people tell me, I take it and I feel the difference, but not all of them. Some of them not. It was very inconsistent, but some people, they say they feel better. So So to me, it's another piece of data that I'm kind of, if we don't have any human data, at least we're gonna have that.
There's one study, if I remember, that looked at NMN and then in humans, and then they tested different DNA markers. So they looked at sirtuin, one of the sirtuins. I don't remember exactly which one, and they did look at DNA breaks, so that the amount of DNA damage that occurred, and they indicated no effect. But then again, to your point, it's possible that they just underdosed. They didn't consume enough because don't quote me on this, but I believe it was around 250 milligrams,
Yeah.
which is pretty typical for a lot of the studies that have looked at NMN supplementation. Some of them have looked at 1 gram or even 2 grams, but the vast majority tend to focus on around 250 to 500. So it's possible that that may be the reason why they didn't see any effect. But I will say at least one study did look at it and showed no effect. So I found that interesting. But yeah, so you were saying about anecdotes that some people say that they do feel better on taking some sort of NAD booster. Is that a specific one? Like do they tend to focus on NR or NMN or niacin or?
I think both, but in my group, most people they take NMN. To be
Okay,
honest.
gotcha.
Um, but I think what he said is a perfect about the dose is a perfect segue to Sinclair's study
Okay.
in 2024, because this study, when you think about it, it was Sinclair was one of the people who ran the study, and it was uh, subsidized by Metro Biotech, which is the very company that supposedly asked the FDA to ban NMN from the so have like they have the strongest incentive to show that it is working when you think about it. So you have Sinclair, you have this company, like they're gonna design the best study to show the most amount of benefits and gonna track everything possible. And this is exactly what they have done in this study. And you know how much NMN they give to the mice?
Tell us.
Yeah. Okay. So something I want to speak about in human terms, they give them equivalent to 3 grams per day in women and 3.5 grams in men. That's how much NMN they gave to the mice. And
Okay.
to me, what does it mean? It means that they believed that the ITP made a mistake and they gave them too little NR. So I think, to me, it shows the belief of the researchers because they want NMN to work and they decided to, to give a high dose, 3.5 grams. But there is a very interesting thing as well. Sinclair, when he speaks about NMN, he says he takes a bolus, right? He takes everything at once, right? Yeah, what he says.
Yeah,
Are
as
you
far
with
as
me?
I'm aware.
Yes. So he takes a bolus. How did they give it to the mice? In water all day long, which I found very interesting because in 2024 study showed that human milk has a lot of NMN. So also nature provides the baby with NMN all day long. It doesn't give it in a bolus. And they also did it in the study. So it kind of makes you think about if we speak about practical implications, maybe we should divide the NMN, maybe taking this bolus thing, because why if the bolus works, why Sinclair didn't give the mice in a bolus? Uh,
Mhm.
yeah, I think it's very interesting.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's a great point. It's true. If you were to ever translate a study, I mean, it's difficult to do with animal research, but in general, if you were to ever translate a study, you'd want to try to make it as applicable as possible. And if people are taking it all in one go, and then you design a study where they're taking it, 5, 6, 7, 8 times a day, I mean, it's pretty big difference in the actual application.
Yes, and there is another case to divide the NAD booster, whatever it is, which is the body consumes NAD on average about 8 hours. You consume one molecule. Of course, different tissues consume in a different rate. The highly rapid replacing tissues, the skin, the gut, they consume more NAD. Um, and but on average, even Sinclair noted in his study, in 2024 study, that the average is 8 hours of. So this suggests maybe the body needs a tiny bit of boost every 6 8 hours instead of just taking a bolus. And so I think it's interesting. It supports the idea replenishing NAD instead of boosting in one time NAD.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what did the study end up finding?
Okay, so let's put this context right. They designed a study to show NMN works, right? This is what they wanted it to show. The study hasn't been, worth noting, the study hasn't been peer reviewed yet. So we can assume that whatever result they found, this is going to be like the highest, the top result you could possibly expect from NMN. Because anything that NMN is going to do is going to be that or lower. Because they have the best interest, they give the design the best study for NMN to work. They have inherent conflict of interest, and they measure everything possible. And despite all of that, NMN did not increase lifespan in male mice. It did increase in female mice by 8.5%, the median lifespan, and also the maximum lifespan by 7.9%.
Interesting.
But if you're a male, it's not very promising. But I think this is basically,
to say the least, you're screwed.
yeah. I mean, because but again, the thing is, they did everything possible and still it didn't work for lifespan. So I think this is one final nail in the coffin of NMN extend lifespan at least in male. Especially that mice, they still mammals as well like us, so we can assume that all of the hormonal differences going to be translated to humans theoretically. Of course, mice die from cancer. Most of it, like 80% of mice die from cancer. We only have like 22% die from cancer. So there is a major difference here. Another interesting thing, they speak about cancer, right? There was a big scare in the NAD community. There was one study that showed that inactive cancer in mice increases death from cancer. They increases the growth. Here they show there was no impact on tumor whatsoever. Not for good or bad. No impact whatsoever. They track the tumor formation in both of these animals.
Mm-hmm.
So because Sinclair, he was asked a lot about, what about the cancer?
Right.
So I think this study can say probably no impact on tumors, not for good or bad. Had it had a positive impact on cancer, protection from cancer, we could have expected mice to live longer because they die from cancer.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So this is the biggest highlight for me. This is the second nail in the coffin. Of course, Sinclair wanted to show that his theory works, that NMN is being translated into better sirtuin activity, which translates into epigenetic preservation of information.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah.
They measure that.
Right.
They measure that. Can I read them? Maybe I can find the quote.
Yeah, please do. Okay, so just to recap while you're looking for that, they fed a really high bolus, well, not a bolus, multiple boluses of NMN, and the male mice did not experience an increase in lifespan. The female mice did experience an increase in lifespan. Neither group of mice, male or female mice, experienced any sort of reduction in like tumor burden or anything like that. No differences in disease index or anything like that. And largely there were no substantial effects of NMN supplementation. Is that about right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. But they did increase the lifespan in the females.
In female, right.
Yes. Okay, I tried to find the exact quote, but basically they said no effect on the epigenetic clocks whatsoever, neither male or female. Zero. Now, the question is why? And I think they also found the reason why. Listen to this.
Okay.
They track, yeah. So let's get back to what the body does, right? When they try to preserve information and extend longevity, it recycles NAD. So you're not going to see niacinamide, which is a byproduct of NAD, increases in the cell because it's going to be recycled, right? You're going to be used again and again and again and again.
Makes sense.
So in this study, they wanted to say they measured niacinamide in the muscles and in the liver, and there was a spike inside the cell of niacinamide in both male and female. And also in the blood, of course. There was a spike of niacinamide in the blood, inside the cell, in the muscles, inside the cell, in the liver. So what does it tell you? It tells you that probably you only got one round of NAD, and this is it. And once you have all these niacinamide in the cell, it actually may inhibit sirtuins.
Wow. Okay. So like a feedback mechanism, essentially,
Yes.
like a regulation of some sort.
So not only they found no impact on the clock, they probably found the reason why. Of course, no impact on the clock because, and this also corroborated by the study that you mentioned, right? In humans, no feedback on the, no impact on the clock.
Hmm.
So suddenly
Well,
all the
no
theory.
impact on sirtuins and DNA damage. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you want me to find the exact quote? I can find it to you if you want to.
Oh, well, I mean, feel free if you want to, if you feel like it's going to add a whole lot. The what I did note on that study, because I briefly went over it a little bit myself, although I plan on doing it in far more depth soon after we're done discussing. Um, they did see a slight improvement in frailty index. Isn't that right?
Yes. Yeah. That will be the yeah. There are more things that they found. We can speak about them right now. So
Okay. Yeah, please do.
when they speak about frailty, worth noting that it's not fitness levels. There was no, that was another surprise. I would expect NMN to have greater impact on fitness levels, physical performance whatsoever. No significant effect, but they did show impact on as you said the frailty index,
Mhm.
which is basically they measure different tissues, such as the fur condition, a lot of physiological conditions of different tissues, and they found that there was benefit. Um,
Okay.
I can find to you exactly the ones. Let me quote actually. I can
Sure.
find.
There was also a point where they looked at physical activity at night, and they noted that that was increased, as in the mice were more active at night when they were on NMN compared to when they weren't. And what I did find notable, which might speak to the mitochondrial aspect, if I can talk about this a little bit while you're looking for the quote, is RER was reduced, which for the listener, RER is respiratory exchange ratio. And what that tells you is the amount of utilization by your metabolism, by your whole body, to use either glucose or carbohydrates or to use fat, so fat molecules. And the lower your RER, that means that more fat is being used as opposed to glucose or carbohydrates. And the reason why that's important is because fat oxidation, or the utilization of fat, means that it's entering into the mitochondrion, because mitochondrion is the only place where we can actually oxidize fat for ATP generation. That's a key point there, because there are other organelles that also oxidize fat, like peroxisomes. But ultimately, a drop in RER is generally seen as a pretty healthy thing, especially in a resting state. So if you are able
Lower,
to
right?
be,
Lower.
yeah, exactly,
Yes.
to
Yes.
have a lower RER. So they did find that NMN
Yes.
supplementation did reduce RER. However, we would need far more measures to be specific on mitochondria. I don't know, actually, do you know on the top of your head if they looked at any other mitochondrial measures specifically?
No, but they did look at gene expression. But
Okay.
let me quote 1 second about the frailty.
Yeah, please do.
They found different aspects of frailty between male and female mice. So in female, I'm quoting, there was a greater fur color maintenance, better coat condition, less kyphosis. I'm not sure how to say it, but it's basically a curvature of the spine as we age,
Okay.
and less tail stiffening. In the male, they saw reduced vision loss, less distended abdomen, maintained fur color, but less than the females, and better breathing rate than the colors. About what you mentioned about the activity levels, indeed, there was more activity, but only in male, not in female. So, so what we have here is a picture of complete different impact of NMN between female and male. We can summarize it in essence. So we have in female, we have increase in lifespan, nothing in males. Males, in female, it completely it's affected dramatically the gut microbiome. In male, not as significant. And they think this gut microbiome actually the reason why there was an increase in lifespan in female, by the way.
Wow. Okay, that's very cool.
Yeah, in essence, it would seem like when you consume NMN, it's for the gut. That would be like not for the epigenetic clock what we thought it is. It's actually the gut.
Yeah, that would be
Uh,
super cool.
yeah, they showed that it has been shown to suppress neuroinflammation, a gut increased micro a specific bacteria that has been shown to suppress neuroinflammation in mice and enriched in human centenarians.
Hmm.
So maybe that will be the play, but only in female for whatever reason. There was a slight improvement in male, but not as much as female. And fitness levels, we spoke about fitness levels. In male, more activity, like you said, and you said also the lower, the more fat burning, like you said. We didn't see, they saw that, they saw nothing in female. And I'm gonna quote about fitness. This is from them. Other measures of systemic function and health in aging were unchanged with NMN treatment, including grip strength, nesting, burrowing ability, and ostrus cycling regularity for female mice. So this is not very promising, to be honest. I would expect more grip strength, something like that. They found nothing about that. So it would seem that most of the impact has been connected to frailty, a symptom of the body tissue, as opposed to the actual activity. But there is something to connect what you said about more activity in males. They also measured genetic expression. I'm quoting. NMN treatment prevented age-related gene expression changes in muscle in males, consistent with previous studies in NMN treatment of aged male mice. In female, it don't happen. They said it's interesting that the same effects are not observed as for females. So you have a situation where NMN affects differently between female and male. With males, we see some physical. So we can see that this, what it really say that NMN opposed some of the gene expression that is associated with aging. So when we age, basically, some of the aging genes are turned on. So our muscles begin to behave more older. And NMN seems to oppose this change in male. And who knows, maybe we can connect that to this study and also what we see in anecdotal evidence. Maybe that's what we actually see. Maybe the people that, especially men, that that they know better physical performance, maybe this is what NMN does in male. Maybe it opposes gene expression of old age, specifically in the muscles. This is what they found in the study.
Yeah, that's a great point. It's certainly possible, absolutely, because it's not like we have a routine test that people can then check. Hey, my gene expression is different. It's not. I mean, you can figure that kind of stuff out, but it's certainly not like a routine blood test or doing some sort of functional test like a sit to stand test or whatever it might be. So it's possible that people are taking NMN or some form of NAD booster and experiencing some of the benefits that aren't necessarily discovered, I should say, in clinical studies. Like we were talking about earlier, they're not measuring specifically anti-aging effects on a genome level. Usually, they're looking at metrics of function, or they're looking at blood markers. And some of those, maybe all of them, are completely the wrong tests to look at. Or, as we talked about, maybe the dosing strategy is completely off. Maybe to your point with this study, they should have dosed it more often, or they should have used higher doses, or there's any number of different reasons why anecdotes may have a potential actual like good reasoning behind them, and the studies are just flawed in so many different ways. I mean, we're kind of shooting in the dark with a lot of the studies, but yeah, this study doesn't exactly scream that NMN is having this information theory effect that Dr. Sinclair has been talking about, especially, and correct me if I'm wrong, you said that the female mice did not experience any gene expression changes. So
Yes.
if that's the case, then, and they saw a longevity effect. So,
Yes.
I mean,
Very
kind of goes against the whole idea, right?
yeah. Very surprising, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
But think about it. What does it mean to the audience, especially for males? So if we should not expect, I would not expect as a male any lifespan benefits from NMN. So they suggest maybe you're going to have some physical performance, more activity with the mice, more fat burning, better genetic expression in the muscles. If this is the case, you should experience those benefits. Meaning that, in other words, what I'm saying is, if you're a male and you consider taking NMN, you should experience a difference. If you do not experience a difference, it's not going to help you. You should feel better muscular performance maybe over age 50, 60, 70. If you do not experience that, then it probably doesn't give you any benefits. It should be as opposed to the females where you can have like a theory. So you get my point here?
Yeah, definitely. I think
you have a test. You have the test if you're a man. You have the test to see if it works for you.
Well, I am also curious actually on your perspective on the idea of exercise, because exercise has an effect on NAD concentrations as well, doesn't it?
Yes, it also activates the NAMPT as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
the recycling, again, we go back to the recycling. It's not just the boosting.
So do you think that people that exercise a lot, let's say a few times a week, a moderate amount, let's say, do you think that it would make sense to even consider like an NAD booster of any sort?
Yeah, absolutely. Because when you think about it, so we have this problem that what Sinclair showed, and we know in other studies, that's a problem. You take this NAD booster, you get one cycle of NAD, and then you get this niacinamide, which is a garbage afterwards, and you get nothing. So you don't really get this epigenetic preservation. But what happens if you activate this NAMPT enzyme and then you boost NMN? I would expect synergetic effect, to be honest.
Okay.
You get more cycles from the same buck of supplement. That's the way I see it, but of course it hasn't been proven. So I think because studies they measure a single bullet, they don't combine things. So in my opinion, so let me give you an anecdotal evidence for my body. Okay.
Yeah, please do.
Okay, so niacin. I take niacin, small dose, low dose niacin, exactly like from what we spoke about. I take it like every 6-7 hours, 50 milligrams. So I usually take like 100 milligrams per day divided, 100 and 125. We know that fasting increases NAD recycling, right? We know that. Are you with me on this?
I believe you. I haven't looked into it, but I believe you.
Yeah, definitely. When you take niacin, you feel a flush. You have to feel a flush. That would indicate that niacin enters into the blood.
Well,
basically because
it depends how you take niacin, because if you take, it depends on the dosage, and it also depends if you consume it with food, and it also depends on if you're taking a long duration niacin, because there are different
pure acute niacin.
Gotcha.
And nicotinic acid. Let's call it nicotinic acid because a lot of people they confuse it with niacinamide. It's not the same thing. Completely not the same thing. So when I take nicotinic acid, 50 milligrams, not sustained release, I have a flush. When I take it when I fast, I see that the flush, I need 75 milligrams to experience a flush. As if the niacin is being consumed somehow very fast when I fast. I don't feel anything. So something tells me the NAD consumption goes up when I fast. That's my experience. Yeah, I think something happens because I don't feel anything, but if I take like 25 milligrams more, suddenly I do feel it. The threshold of the flush goes up for whatever reason in my body.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, it shows some synergetic effect. The body begins to consume more NAD, to repair all this. Okay, so this guy there is not enough food around. We have to protect this body for future generations on this planet. Maybe there was a catastrophe or something. We need to preserve epigenetic information, not just the genetic information, because we need this guy to be healthy to reproduce later. So I think this is exactly what happens, and I think here exactly these NAD boosters, they make more sense. To me, if you implement NAD recycling first, NAD recycling strategies first.
And you're saying NAD recycling strategies like fasting or potentially exercise, does that also fall into that category for you?
Yeah, especially intense exercise, yes.
Okay, gotcha.
But of course, it's my theory, right? I mean, we don't have data. For the data people, it's just my theory based on connecting the dots and seeing what the DNA does when it's trying to preserve youthfulness.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I'm actually, do you want to talk about this? Anything additional to this? Because I do have another study that I wanted to talk about that I think you're familiar with, which is the Nuchido Time Plus study. So I don't know. I don't want to move on to that
Yeah.
before we finish this.
Mm, Let me think about anything else. Okay, I think the last insight is we should view element completely different between male and female. I mean, I don't view that as the same supplement for men and women. Yeah, I would separate completely. I mean, the answer to the question should I take any men is probably different between men and women. The impact is going to be different. The amount of differences that they found in the studies is staggering. It's supported by other studies as well.
There are some human studies as well that have looked at NMN supplementation in women and shown that there's a slight improvement in like glycemic metrics. So that means for the audience, like blood sugar regulation, being able to remove blood sugar out of the bloodstream, stuff like that.
Yeah.
It's a very small effect. It's nothing like that's life changing. It's not like it's going to reverse diabetes or anything, but that that could play into that whole idea as well. It's certainly a possibility.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely. I think of this perspective of of viewing NMN in different angles between men and women. Maybe it's going to help us. You know.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think that's absolutely true in science in general, that we shouldn't be so
So right now,
generalizing.
every study about NMN has to do like female cohort and male cohort, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I would extend that to all of science, right? And I think I know that the NIH has been starting to force researchers to, especially for animal studies, but I think probably for human studies as well, where they're forcing researchers to have two cohorts, to have make sure that they're also including women, and hopefully to power their studies so that if they were to just look at one cohort, do they have enough data there to be able to detect signals? Because to your point, I mean, it's not just NMN, it's across the entire scientific spectrum. For certain things, there's a lot of similarity between men and women. And for other things, there are no similarities whatsoever. They're incredibly dissimilar. And we do need that research to be able to distinguish the two. And there's been this absolute, I mean, I don't want to call it criminal, but there's been this such a focus on male research, talking about male
Yeah.
mice, male primates, all that, and humans. Uh, and we've ignored a lot of that female research, which is a real shame. And I'm glad that the NIH is picking up on that. And they've picked up on it maybe 5, 10 years ago already.
Yeah.
So they're already starting
Think
to
about
try
the,
to
the, the
rectify that.
ITP, the ITP studies.
Not just the ITP, just in general, every study by the NIH, they're starting to really focus in on women to make sure that we're serving them as well. Which so yeah, your point about NMN, I completely echo it, and I would say across the board.
One note about this study.
Yeah.
Last note. The question is why would NMN then increase lifespan in women in female, right? Female mice. That would be a very interesting question. So there are two possible options. One is the effect on the gut bacteria.
Yeah.
And the second option is it would seem that females, also women, they suffer more from frailty than men after menopause.
Mm.
More bone loss, more muscle loss, and it could be that this anti-frailty um, effect that we have seen in the study actually translated into longer life as well. So it could be that we don't see. So most mice die from cancer. It doesn't protect from cancer, but it does reduce frailty. In women, if you reduce frailty, maybe you get more impact on life extension as well.
I think that's an excellent point. Yeah, that's so true. Both could be absolutely the case.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to this Nuchido Time Plus trial. Which so first off, let me ask you: have you read that study?
No, because it was, yeah. Maybe you can cut it later as you wish, but it was done on a commercial product, right? Nuchido
Yeah.
by Nicola Conlo. Conler. Yeah,
Yeah, something.
that's
I can't remember her
yeah.
last name,
Actually, I
but
spoke to her about a week ago. We went to a longevity conference here in London, and I
very
saw her.
cool.
Yeah, I spoke for like 20 minutes. She's very kind. Um, she came from the drug research, by the way. How do you know that? So to me, when I see a product, a commercial product study, I usually I don't read the studies because I know I'm suspecting some conflict of interest. Um, so that's why I didn't read the study.
Yeah, there. I mean, certainly there's no doubt that there's a higher chance of conflict of interest. I usually always consider studies. I mean, regardless of the source, I try to consider them. And I mean, you
Why
can.
don't you think about the study and we can think about the results together?
Yeah, sure. So I'll describe it. Nuchido Time Plus is a supplement, as you pointed out, that or commercial supplement where the supplement. So what I like about, let me start with the introduction. The introduction is that researchers point out that it is true that a lot of NMN supplementation, NR supplementation studies in humans have shown basically no effect. They acknowledge that. So then their theory or their hypothesis was that, well, it's possible that what we're doing is that we're increasing blood levels of NAD, but we're not actually increasing the cellular level. So exactly a problem that we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
That the tissue levels of this NAD aren't increasing. And then they started thinking, okay, well, what could be the reason for that? Well, one, they said, sure, a lot of studies have looked at boosting NAD, so the actual entrance or the entrance of these precursor molecules, NMN, NR, et cetera, niacin, to then ultimately produce NAD. That's one part of the equation. But what they were saying is that we should also be targeting the other side of the equation, the degradation of NAD. So they were trying to target particular enzymes that use up large amounts of NAD. So not only were they going to try to boost the enzymes that produce NAD, but they were also going to try to inhibit the enzymes that are less critical that consume large amounts of NAD, especially those enzymes are highly upregulated during aging.
The
And
CD38, right? Yeah.
yeah, CD38 is one of the major ones, exactly. So they were focused on that. So not only are they going to be supplementing with an NAD booster, but they're going to try to upregulate or increase the activity of the NAD boosting enzymes and decrease the activity of the NAD inhibiting or consumption enzymes. So therefore, then you would be increasing the overall pool of NAD. So they came up with this product that has a bunch of different components in it from an NAD booster, including parsley, which has an effect on these NAD enzymes, ECGC from tea, that was also in there, and
Lipic acid.
lipoic acid, that was another one. Thank you. And rutin, I believe, or however you
Yes.
pronounce that, was another one. And maybe
It's a
there's
flower that has written. They use a flower, I think. Yeah.
perfect. Yeah, thanks. So yeah, so they had this like various different molecules that they were going to apply to these human subjects, and then see over. I think it was so it was a crossover design, if I remember correctly. So that means that the participants get their baseline measures taken before they start consuming the supplement. Then they consume the supplement for 4 weeks. They had a number of measures taken out throughout that time. And then they get another measurement taken. And then they cross over, which means that they go through a washout period where they just go home. They're not taking the supplement anymore. And basically, their body gets to recalibrate to a baseline state. And then they were put on the other supplement. The other supplement in this situation is the placebo control, so the inert substance. Obviously, they don't know which condition they're in, and that's kind of the strength of that kind of study. So that was basically the design. Then they compared the values before versus after, as well as placebo versus the treatment or the NAD boosting composite
The values
substance.
of which values did they track?
So they looked at a number of metrics. They looked at an aging metric. I believe that was based off of the glycosylation or the sugar addition to a particular type of protein, an IgG antibody. They also looked at glycosylation as a whole, and
A1C, do you mean?
A1C? Yeah, A1C, exactly. And then they looked at a number of molecular markers. So they did what I did really like about this is that they did look at SIRT1. So they wanted to look at one of the sirtuins. They also looked at CD38, and they looked at NAMPT, which is the enzyme that you had mentioned prior. They also looked at blood NAD levels, and they did show that there's an increase in blood NAD, which I found rather comical, to be honest with you, simply because they had said earlier that studies had also shown blood increases in NAD, but hadn't seen any increases in tissue. So it would make sense then to prove that your cocktail works, that you would then want to look at tissue levels, but they didn't do that.
Excellent point.
So they looked at, they looked at blood levels, and sure enough, it did increase blood levels. So that's great. However, then they looked at the glycosylation. There were improvements in glycosylation, so that's great. So actually, it was glycosylation of the IgG, this antibody. So that's another metric that they looked at instead of A1C. And they found that it did improve slightly, so there was a statistically significant effect. And I would say that was probably the most convincing data that they showed. They used an aging metric, so they looked at they again tried to relate this glycosylation of this IgG antibody. For anybody listening, don't worry about is it an IgG antibody. Just remember, just think it's a protein in the cell. Okay, so there's a glucose, a carbohydrate that's being attached to the cell that isn't supposed to be there, essentially. So the more of it that you have, typically that's associated with greater aging and worse health in general. So
which animal was tested? Was it on mice, on human tissues?
This was all in humans. Yeah, the whole thing. And they showed, which is great. They showed that the humans, well, these are the same people, but when the people were on this cocktail, this NAD cocktail, that there was a decrease in the aging based off of this IgG glycosylation. So this specific type of aging, I don't want to call it a clock. It's not like a Horvath clock or anything like that, but it's just another way of kind of measuring the aging of a person. And they showed that it decreased a little bit, I think by like 1.5 years or something like that. And the placebo basically didn't change. What I should note, though, is that they actually didn't indicate any statistics for that. So they showed the data, but they never mentioned any statistics. So I'm not sure if it was actually statistically significant. My guess is that it actually wasn't. And the reason why I say that is because the confidence intervals, I'm not even going to go into that, just that there's some overlap on the confidence intervals. So my guess is that it's not statistically significant compared to placebo. When they looked at SIRT1, so this sirtuin protein that we've been discussing, this enzyme.
In the blood specific tissue?
This was in tissue. Nope. Don't quote me on this. Do not quote me on this. I want to say actually it might be in blood, and they're specifically looking at immune cells, but definitely don't quote me on that.
I won't quote you, don't worry.
Okay.
I'm taking the secret to my grave, don't worry about
that. Okay. Well, anybody else listening to this, don't quote me on that either. Okay. I appreciate it. But they looked at sirtuin-1 protein levels, which I did appreciate. They looked at protein levels as opposed to RNA, which can be deceptive. And they showed that there was an increase over the 28 days of sirtuin-1. I should huge red caveat here. I'm not going to actually edit it in, but I'm just throwing this out here. They used the wrong statistical test. They used a t-test to measure between multiple comparisons. So they did use the wrong test for the actual statistics. And for measures like CD38, they did not show any effect. So there's no effect. In addition to that, I believe NAMPT was increased. So there's kind of mixed
Of
results.
this enzyme, of the
Yeah,
enzyme,
of the enzyme, right?
not the
Exactly.
gene. Yeah,
Right. This is all in the actual protein levels.
yeah,
No gene reading of any sort.
yes.
Um, and I got to admit, as a molecular bio or having done a lot of molecular biology, looking at the Western blots of the actual experiments themselves, they were pretty bad. They were just not good quality. And then if you look at the supplemental material, they specifically only compared against baseline. So remember how I said that they did baseline for the
Oh,
subjects
yeah.
and then 4 weeks later, they only report the data on baseline versus 4 weeks later within each group. So for the cocktail group and for the placebo group. And placebo group, nothing changed. For the cocktail group, quote unquote, things changed, as in increases in sirtuin 1. However, when you look at the supplemental material, you can see some of the additional work that they did, and you can see why they didn't compare between the placebo and the
Uh,
cocktail, because by my eye, I could see that probably there was no difference between the two. So overall, the only piece of data that I thought was pretty good was this glycosylation of the IgG. So that's a potentially a benefit there, but overall, I think that their hypothesis, it doesn't disprove their hypothesis by any
yeah.
means. Doesn't it could be that they didn't dose things correctly. Like that's entirely possible. So, or the study didn't run long enough, or whatever it might be. And it was a small study, to be fair. Again, I will say sometimes they specifically chose, for some of their measures, they specifically chose only people that saw massive increases in blood NAD. So they excluded participants that did not see much of an increase in blood NAD, which
They
is fine.
said that in the study.
Yeah, they did do that in the study. They
Okay,
said that in the study,
interesting.
which is completely fair to do. But it now you power the study from like 8 people or 10 people. I don't remember exactly how many people it was,
Hyper
but
responsive.
yeah, yeah, yeah. To focusing just on hyper responsive people, and you're only looking at then like 4 people. So now you're starting to get really into this gray world where like making any sort of strong conclusions off a study like that is just, I think, just kind of null and void. So anyway,
That's why we need you. You know, you have the brains to see those things that a lot of us miss.
well, I appreciate it. I appreciate it. It was
You have a
interesting.
technical background to see the how they did it.
I appreciate it. So yeah, that was essentially. I mean, I will say, like, I'm glad that they looked at some molecular measures, because one of my critiques of a lot of the NAD studies, as you pointed out earlier as well, is that just looking at functional measures when a lot of the claims are related to aging
Yeah,
is a little bit of a difficult sell there. So I'm glad that they looked at it. Unfortunately, I just didn't find it that convincing. So there's my report on the Nuchido Time Plus
I have
study.
a theory about the result.
Oh, please do. Yes.
They have their 600 milligrams of lipoic acid, whether it's alpha lipoic acid like it states on the label. Uh, Nicola, the founder, told me they now use all lipoic acid, which is more active. Either way, 600 milligrams of alpha lipoic acid improves glucose metabolism. It reduces A1C. It reduces. So it could be that the result you mentioned um, about the IgG, you just needed the alpha lipoic acid and you get the same result.
That is an excellent piece of information. Yeah, it's entirely. I did not know that, so that's a
I
great
can
addition.
explain. I can explain even what alpha lipoic acid does.
Yeah,
Uh,
please. Yeah, sure. Why not?
yeah.
Let's go
So
for it.
yeah. Okay. So when glucose comes to the cell, don't want glucose to hang in the cell too long, because it glycates protein. It's also deactivate longevity genes as well. When your DNA sees sugar in the cell, it turns off the sirtuins, the NAD recycling, all of that stuff. So you want to get rid of it. Lipoic acid is a natural molecule produced by plants, by our bodies, and when you consume it in a supplement form, it directly ships the glucose into the mitochondria. It gets rid of it and make energy out of it. A good contrast to it is metformin. Metformin does the opposite thing. It sends it to the glycolysis path. So, metformin does it via getting rid of the glucose in a very inefficient way, and lipoic acid actually enhances mitochondria activity. But either way, you're gonna get gonna get rid of a lot of glucose by using taking alpha lipoic acid, and we know definitely it reduces A1C in diabetics, in humans in general. So it's highly researched molecule.
That's great feedback. I haven't looked into it yet, so that's it's not an
And
area
also
that
it
I know.
activates HER2 and 1, I think. I think it's because of the removal of glucose. But I read a lot of studies in animals that it activates HER2 and 1. So I think, I mean, you can get all the results that they may have found by the alpha lipoic acid.
Right. Okay. So it may not be NAD related whatsoever.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay, so we've been talking about NAD for the longest time. We've been talking about Dr. Sinclair's information theory of aging. We've talked about Dr. Sinclair's work in general. He has released a human study as well last year, which was wholly unconvincing in my perspective. But again, they were looking at functional measures and clinical measures.
Yeah.
And they did a little bit of methodological woo-woo, kind of some hand waving to try to mask some of the effects, I think. So I wasn't too impressed with that study. So with all of this information that you've detailed and that we've been discussing, what's kind of your takeaway? Like how
Yeah.
would you summarize this? How do you think about NAD? How do you think about NAD boosters, et cetera? You've talked a little bit about it, but kind of put it all together if you can.
Okay, so up to age 55, I would say let's focus on recycling NAD. And I take low dose niacin, very cheap. 50, as I said, 50 milligrams every 6-7 hours. Cost nothing. Not very controversial. Highly researched in humans. Very safe. And that I take that because of the reasons we mentioned before. I want to make sure my body has sufficient NAD both for the sirtuins and the PARPs. That's my main reason. Another time I specifically take NAD boosters if I go to do some X-ray, or I take a flight, or I expose my skin to a lot of radiation from the sun if I go on vacation. Then in that situation, I think you want to provide your body with the fuel that is going to repair NAD. Simple, DNA. Sorry, the DNA. Never thought that NAD and DNA have the same letters anyway.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah, no way. So you want the NAD for the DNA, and so I think everybody can focus. So in my strategy, as a young man, NAD recycling comes 90% of my effort and 10% cheap NAD booster. That then it goes to the if you're a man over. So this is what I would do. I don't recommend anybody to do anything. This is also what I speak in my private group as well. So this is where I extracted from. If I'm a man if I am a man, not you, you have to consult your doctor with anything you do. But if I'm a man, I'm over 55. I'm curious about NAD. I have the budget to take NAD. I'm not falling into the hype of NAD, but I want to see does it work for me. Then I would take 1 gram, 1 gram for like 3 weeks, and I would check the impact on my exercise routine, or my endurance, or my energy levels. If I see nothing after 3-4 weeks, then probably it's not going to help me. I should expect to feel it. If I'm a woman, then I would actually track. I'm gonna keep more open mind. Maybe it's gonna help me more. Maybe I need to see more research about that. But my feeling is my gut feeling, quote unquote, because of the impact on the gut, that women may benefit more from NAD boosters in general because of the impact of frailty. But what I'm saying is, I think for men, I have enough data to know it's not going to extend my lifespan. To be honest, for women, maybe I need to let's see what's more research comes out. As you noted, more and more studies from the NIH, they take into account women as well, because Mickey Mouse basically monopolized the entire industry. We need Minnie Mouse as well. So I think I would keep more open mind. Maybe it's going to help me with frailty. Maybe it's going to. So in that situation, I'm going to keep more open mind. Maybe it does going to help me with aging. But if I'm lower in budget, I will go with low dose niacin separated, and maybe invest in other things. That's what I would do personally.
Are you focusing on niacin over something like NMN or NR because, or are you, sorry, reverse that. Would you say people should focus on NMN or NR because there's research on it, like preclinical data on it, and there isn't as much on niacin and its longevity effects? Or how are you thinking about it? Because you said that you take niacin and you think that people that may not have that much of a budget should go
Yeah.
with niacin. Is there a reason for that distinction?
Yes. First of all, prioritization, meaning that I feel there are other supplements
Mm.
that are more important than NMN for longevity and aging.
Yeah.
Um, and I also want to, and I feel when you spend so much money on a supplement that's maybe it's gonna take your attention away from what really works. And I don't want people to. So I would take, of course, if you have unlimited budgets, then experiment with it. Another aspect is that what I really like about okay, this is another big thing for me. I've seen the human study that increases NAD in the muscles by 6 times, which is to me significant. It's exactly what I want. But there is another reason in Rabinowitz study. They showed, and also in Sinclair study, as I said, when you take NMN, you see increase in niacinamide. Niacinamide inhibits sirtuins. I don't like it. In Rabinowitz study, they replicate this result, which gives me confidence it is. But they also tested niacin, and niacin did not spike niacinamide. So to me, it's like a safer approach, meaning I'm not going to hurt my recycling of NAD. I feel more certain about it. So it's cheaper, and I feel confidence about the dose. I know that 50 milligrams is going to give me every NAD that I need for the next 6-8 hours of the day. It is cheap enough that I can invest in other things that I know I feel certain about working. And also, I've seen the human study about the recycling of the increase of NAD in the muscles. And I know it's not going to turn into niacinamide. I know the gut bacteria and the liver and the gut itself are not going to make it niacinamide. All what my body sees is niacinamide. I don't want my body to see all of niacinamide. So all of that is what. But of course, I think another approach, which I think extremely useful, is combine all of these because they all target NAD. So if you feel certain that you want to boost NAD, maybe the best strategy, again, it's individual choice, but maybe the best strategy is combine different NAD pathways. Maybe a bit of niacinamide, a bit of NMN, a bit of NR. NR despite the similarity in structure to NMN, it seems to work a bit different than NMN. So maybe we're going to have a mix of them. We're going to cover all the NMN bases. So I think both strategies they work. For me, also it's also a budget thing, to be honest. Yeah.
Yeah, it makes complete sense.
Especially after I see a Sinclair study, they gave them 3 grams. I mean, you know how it's very expensive, 3 grams.
Extremely, yeah, definitely. Because they usually sell them in like 250 milligram capsules,
Yes.
right? So you have to just continuously take so much.
Well, what if these are the researchers who try to get the best result, and this is how much they gave to the mice. So it makes you wonder, maybe the 1 gram of that Sinclair steaks, maybe it's not enough. Especially that Michael from Conquer Aging channel, he saw that 50-60 milligrams of niacin, they increased his blood NAD as 1 gram of NMN. So it gives me even more confidence that maybe 1 gram is not sufficient. Maybe.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, yeah, I mean that's a great summary. I'm glad that you're able to come on here and discuss it in some depth, and we were able to talk about it for an hour and a half. Which, like I said, I think other podcasts or just general discussions in general, they'll spend like 15 minutes on subject and then they'll just move on to the next thing. I think what's great about this is that we're able to chat about multiple studies, go into the nuances. I mean, some of the nuances that you described are not things that a lot of other people have discussed before, which is why it's so great to get your perspective on this. So
Thank you so much.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Do
and
you?
we wanted to stay. I mean, the hype around NMN or what happens with Sinclair, a lot of videos attacking him, they really do not serve us because they give us, in my opinion, we are more confused. At the end of the day, it's about a decision. How do you protect your body from aging? I don't really care if Sinclair made money from a supplement or not, to be honest. I only want to know what should I do, or my parents should they do. So I think what we did here, we isolated the actual data and the actual conclusions in the right context without having biases against people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, a lot of the research is based off of preclinical animal studies, so we always have to take that with a massive grain of salt or multiple grains of salt. But yeah, we can still look at that stuff and get some sort of indication of where, if a person, to your point, if a person has the money and wants to get a little bit more experimental, then they can see what effect it might have. So yeah, I mean that's good insight. Where can people find you if they're interested in following some of your work?
Uh, Wellness Messiah channel. It's a Wellness Messiah podcast with Ramon. I'm not the Messiah. It's a name that's supposed to evoke memory, so that's why I chose the name. And also my website. You can find it as well. Um, but before you go, I have to congratulate you about the PhD, and I wonder if you want to share with us how do you feel about
Uh,
it.
well, first off, thanks. Secondly, I feel like $1 million. It feels like a PhD can feel like a massive weight. It's like multiple chains holding Godzilla down or King Kong down, and I feel like I've finally broken open those chains, and I'm like off free to do what I want, which is this kind of stuff, being able to actually discuss with intelligent people and be able to break down the science and nerd out like I would love to do. So I can finally do that. So I'm deeply appreciative and extremely happy to be in that situation. But thank you for the well wishes. I appreciate it.
Yes, do you intend to add doctor to the name of the channel? Dr. Physionic?
Nah, people suggested it, but nah, I just like the clean Physionic that's going to stay. Plus, you'd have to go through a bunch of other legal, there's like trademark and all that stuff, and I just don't want to touch any of that stuff. But Physionic, I think, just is a great at the way it is.
Thank you for doing the hard work to help us translate studies correctly, because you have the in-depth uh, nuts and bolts into what they do behind the scenes.
Yeah, I appreciate it. It's a learning process for me too. I may have my PhD, but I have a lot of learning. As a matter of fact, I'll show you a book that I'm reading right now, meta-analyses by Michael Borenstein. So this is a book that I'm taking a lot of notes on because
2020 came up 2024.
no, it came out a few years ago already. Maybe even 5 or 10 years ago. But the information in it is pretty pretty up to date. And it's got multiple authors from people that are like the absolute top in meta-analyses and statistics. So anyway, the point being that it's always, I still have to improve, and that's true of anyone, and that's the goal, to constantly try to get better and better at things.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah, it
Yeah.
shows in your videos and your work as well.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Likewise. Hope you enjoyed that discussion. I certainly did. If you're curious to check out Ramon's work, I'll have his details linked in the description. Thanks for sticking out with us, and I'll catch you in the next episode.